The lock went on at 7. It was the 11th of January, 7 in the morning, and there was snow coming down the way it comes down in a valley town, slow and enormous and completely indifferent. And 2 women in high-visibility coats were fitting a steel plate over the door my grandmother used to open at 5:30 every day of her working life. I was 28 years old. I was 39 weeks and 4 days pregnant, and I was standing on the pavement outside the Cawdry Public Baths in somebody else's borrowed coat holding a carrier bag with my whole life in it. The notice taped to the glass had one signature on it, 2 initials and a surname in black ink from a pen I had watched a woman uncap 100 times.
Welcome, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Then a car door shut behind me, and a woman I had not seen in 4 years and 8 months walked straight past me without looking and put her palm flat on the door they had just sealed and said, "To nobody, it's still warm." If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I want to back up first because if I start there, you will hate her. And I need you to understand that I did too, and that I was wrong about almost every part of it. My name is Nessa Rooke, and I read water. I want to be careful about how I say that because it sounds like a party trick, and it is not one. And because my grandmother spent 30 years making sure I never once said it like a party trick. What it means is this: put my wrist in a body of water, and I will tell you its temperature to within half a degree every time, without a thermometer, without thinking about it, the way you can tell somebody is standing behind you. But that is only the small part of it. The bigger part is that water carries everything that has been in it. And if you have been raised at the edge of the same body of water your whole life, you stop needing anyone to tell you what has happened in a building. I can walk into a pool hall and know from the smell coming off the surface that a filter has been running dirty for 6 days. I can tell you from the way a bath fills whether there is air in a pipe 2 floors below. I have said there is a crack under the east tank to a room full of people with clipboards and been laughed at and been right, and then been laughed at again the following year for having been right, which is a particular experience I do not recommend. My grandmother was called Maud Rooke, and she kept the Cawdry Public Baths for 31 years. Her mother kept them before her for 26. The building went up in 1903 with public money in a mill town that had cholera in living memory, and 11 houses to a shared tap. And it was not built to be pretty. And it was pretty anyway. Emerald tile from the floor to the height of your shoulder, brass everywhere. A barrel roof with roof lights that turned the whole hall green at 4 in the afternoon, and a pool that glowed from underneath like something kept in a jar. There were the slipper baths down the east corridor, 12 cubicles with cast iron tubs from when half the town had nowhere to wash. There was a boiler in the basement the size of a small bus with her name cast into the plate on her front, because they named them then. Bessie. My grandmother talked to her the way other women talk to a difficult old dog. And the keeper lived above the boiler house. That was the arrangement from the beginning, and it never changed. 2 rooms and a kitchen over the plant room. And in exchange, you were the person who was there at 5:30 and the person who was there at 11 at night. And you were the one who got out of bed in February when the pressure dropped. And you did not get a wage worth the name, and you did not get a holiday, and you did not ever get to leave the building for more than 2 days at a stretch. My great-grandmother did it My grandmother did it. I did it from the age of 22, when Nan died on a Tuesday in the flat above the plant room, with the pipes ticking under the floor. She left me 4 things: the flat, which was not really hers to leave, a tin of things that turned out to be mostly receipts, a bootlace with a brass tally on it, the original 1903 bather's check, number 1, worn soft as a river stone, the first one ever handed over that counter, which her mother had taken off the hook the day the place opened, and simply never put back. And a sentence, which she said so often that for years I thought it was something everyone's grandmother said. Warm water gives everyone away, love. She meant it practically at first. She meant that you can lie to a doctor and you can lie to your own family, and you cannot lie to a hot bath. That people came into her slipper baths with their coats buttoned up to the chin and their faces arranged, and 40 minutes later they came out and told her everything, unasked every single time, because there is something about being warm and clean and alone in a small tiled room that undoes a person from the inside. 31 years of the town's secrets delivered to a woman with a mop. She never repeated one of them. Not once. I only know that they existed because occasionally somebody would come in and look at her a certain way, and she would say, quietly, "That's finished with. That is," and they would nod and go and swim. But she also meant it the other way, and it took me until I was 28 and lying on a plant room floor to understand what the other way was. There were 4 of us who ran that building by the end, and 3 of us were not paid to. Elsie Marchbank was 74 and had taught swimming at Cawdry since she was 19. She taught my grandmother's generation, and she taught my mother, and she taught me. And by the time this story starts, she was teaching a Tuesday 9 o'clock class of 6 women in their 70s, all of whom she had first put in that water when they were 4 years old and terrified. She wore a whistle she never blew. She had a way of standing at the shallow end with her arms folded that could make a grown woman stop messing about from 30 yards. And she kept, in a plastic bag inside a biscuit tin inside her sideboard, the original 1903 license book of the Cawdry Public Baths, because in 1997 the council had a clear-out, and Elsie Marchbank had looked at a skip and made a decision. I want you to remember the biscuit tin. It matters later more than anything else in this story except one person. Kit Okoro was 22 and had come to me at 17 as the worst lifeguard I have ever employed, which is not a criticism because at 17 she could not swim particularly well and had lied on the form. I taught her. She is now better in the water than I am. She runs the whole east side, and she has the single most useful quality a person can have in a building like that, which is that she notices things and says them out loud immediately, regardless of who is standing there. I would not be sitting here without her. And then there was me, the keeper, the plant, the rotas, the chemicals, the complaints, the 26-year-old boiler pump that was actually 91 years old in a 26-year-old jacket, and the flat above it with the ticking floor. that was my life. 940 swims a week in the winter, more in summer. 4 schools, 2 clubs, 1 Tuesday class of 6 women in their 70s, and a building older than anyone in it. And once, for 3 years, it also had Ines Harrow in it. I have to do this bit properly. I have started this part of the story 4 times in my head, and every time I make her sound like something she was not. And I am not going to make her a monster, and I am not going to make her a saint. Because she was neither, and because the truth is worse and better than both. Ines Harrow was born in Cawdry. That is the first thing. Everybody in this town knows the Harrows now as a name on hoardings. But Rosalind Harrow was a Cawdry girl who married money. And then, when the money turned out to be smaller than advertised, went out and made a great deal more of it herself. And by the time Ines was born, her mother owned 2 streets in a city 40 miles from here, and had every intention of never coming back. Ines came back anyway, every summer until she was 15, because her grandmother was still here, in a terrace on Bank Street, and would not be moved. Which is how, in the summer, she was 8, and I was -3, and then again every summer after. A girl with a matched set of everything ended up at the Cawdry Baths at 9:30 in the morning in a class taught by Elsie Marchbank. She could not swim. That is the second thing. Rosalind Harrow's daughter arrived at that pool unable to put her face in the water, and Elsie stood at the shallow end with her arms folded and did not let her leave. And by the end of that August, she was doing widths. So when she came back at 31, and I will get to why, she came back to a building she had learned something in. I need you to hold on to that because for 4 years and 8 months, I did not hold on to it at all. For 4 years and 8 months, I held on to a signature instead. I was 24 when she came back. She was 31, 3 years into working for her mother's company, and she was in Cawdry for 11 days to look at a mill site on the other side of the river. And on the 4th of those days, it rained the way it does here. And she walked into my building at 4 in the afternoon with wet shoulders because it was the only door on that road that was open. She stood in the doorway of the hall and looked up at the roof and did not say anything for a long time. The roof lights were doing the thing they do at 4 o'clock, where the whole barrel of the ceiling goes green from the water. She had her hair in a low knot that was coming loose at the nape, the way it always did by 4 in the afternoon, in any building, in any year. And I did not know yet that this was a thing about her that I would end up able to time by. Then she put her palm flat on the emerald tile of the wall by the door, held it there for a second, and said, "It's still warm." I said, "That's the calorifier. It runs behind that wall." And she said, "I know, somebody told me that when I was 9. Her name was Ines Harrow, and she was an alpha. And I want to describe her accurately, which means starting with the least interesting thing, which is that she was very good looking in the way that money makes people, and moving on immediately, because that was not it. What she was still. I have never met anyone so completely without fidget. She sat the way a cat sits. When she listened to you, she did not do any of the things people do to demonstrate listening. No nodding, no encouraging noises. And the first 3 times we spoke, I was convinced she was bored. And then I realized she could repeat back to me, 3 weeks later, sentences I did not remember saying. Dark hair, so dark a brown that in the plant room it read as black, worn in that low knot. olive coloring that went gold in August and gray in January, and eyes that were genuinely almost black, not brown, black, so that in a badly lit corridor you could not find where the pupil stopped, which had the effect of making people flinch slightly when she looked at them directly, and never once seemed to occur to her as an explanation for why people flinched. There was a silver streak at her left temple, which she had had since she was 26, and which she did not color. Her coat was black, and it was not black. In the green light coming off that water, it turned out to be the darkest possible green, and I noticed that in the second week, and did not tell her for 3 years. She wore a steel signet on her right hand, turned inward so the face of it sat against her palm, so that all you saw was the band. Her mother had given it to her at 21, and she never took it off, and she never showed it. And when she had to say something difficult, not something unpleasant, something difficult, something that had cost her to arrive at, she would put her palm flat on the nearest wall first. Every time. 11 days into knowing her, I had noticed it. 3 months in, I understood it. She was checking whether the building was warm. Because at 9 years old, in a class she hated, an old woman with folded arms had told her to put her hand on the tile and let the building tell her something true before she opened her mouth. And it had gone in so deep that she was still doing it at 31 in boardrooms 40 miles away, with her hand on plasterboard that had nothing behind it at all. Elsie, when I eventually told her this, was quiet for a while and then said, "Well, some of it takes." 11 days became 3 years. I am not going to pretend it was gradual or careful. She extended the mill survey twice. Then she took a room at the Farrier for 6 weeks. Then she stopped taking a room at all, because by then she was sleeping in a flat above a boiler with a floor that ticked, and getting up at 5:30 with me in the dark, and standing in the plant room in a coat worth more than the plant with a chipped enamel mug of tea in both hands. 2 sugars, watching me bleed air out of a system she did not understand, and asking questions about it that were so precise they took me an hour to answer. Nan had been dead 2 years. I was 24 and I had a building and a boiler and a town and absolutely nobody. And then for 3 years I had somebody, and she was the most completely present person I have ever been near. She learned the plant. That is the part nobody believes. Ines Harrow, whose actual job was buying buildings like mine and turning them into things that were not like mine, spent 3 years learning the Cawdry baths from the basement up. And by the end of it, she could bring Bessie up from cold on her own, which takes 4.5 hours and a great deal of patience, and a specific knack with a valve that has been out of true since the Second World War. She could not read the water. That was mine. But she got closer than anyone else ever has. By the 3rd winter, she could stand at the rail with her hand in the pool and say 28 and be out by a degree and be furious about the degree. And I would laugh at her and she would take it absolutely straight-faced and go and do it again the next day. And she never took her shoes off in that building, not once in 3 years. I asked her about it and she said something about the tile. And then a year later at 2 a.m, told me the truth, which was that when she was 9, her mother had sent her to that class with the wrong kind of everything. And the other girls had noticed her shoes on the side. And she had decided at 9 years old, in a way she had never bothered to undecide, that she would keep them on her feet. She said it the way you report a small piece of weather. I remember thinking, somebody should have got to you earlier. Rosalind Harrow came to Cawdry twice in those 3 years. The first time she was perfectly polite to me for 90 minutes over a lunch I could not afford and did not pay for. She asked me about the building's boiler and the roof and the tank and the tenancy, and I answered every single question, gladly, in detail, because I was 25 and I thought a woman asking about your work was a woman taking an interest. She was 60 then, silver, small, with a voice you had to lean towards. She never raised it. In 4 years, I have never heard her raise it. She thanked me for my time, and she said, and I remember this exactly, "You're very good at what you do, Nessa, and there is no future in it, and I think you already know that." The second time, she did not speak to me at all. 11 weeks after that second visit, Ines Harrow left Cawdry. There was no fight. That is what I could never get past. There was no fight. There was no other woman. There was no slow cooling that I could look back on and identify. There were 4 days in which she was very quiet, and one evening in which she stood in the plant room with her palm flat on the wall by the header tank for much longer than usual, and then said, without turning round, that she was going back to work for her mother properly in the city, and that she was not going to be able to come back for a while. I said, "How long is a while?" And she said, "I don't know." And I said, "That's not an answer, Ines." And she said, "I know it isn't." She left the next morning at 6:10. She took the coat that was really dark green. She did not take the mug, and I found it in the plant room 3 days later where she had left it on the shelf above the pump, half full, and I did not move it, and it is still there. She did not call, not once in 4 years and 8 months. Not a message, not a card, not a name in the corner of somebody else's email. I wrote to her twice in the first year and got nothing, and then I stopped because there is a thing that happens where you become a person who writes letters to somebody who does not answer, and I had a building to run. And Cawdry being Cawdry, I got to watch her career happen in the local paper. Harrow Group buys the Barrowfield site. Harrow Group and the mill. Harrow Group's director of acquisitions, photographed in a hard hat at the ribbon cutting for something that used to be a school. Always at her mother's left shoulder. Always with her hair coming loose at the nape by 4 in the afternoon. I want to tell you that I hated her cleanly. I did not. What I did was worse and much more tiring. For 4 years, I ran a Victorian building on a council grant that shrank every March. And every time something broke, I heard her voice explaining the valve back to me correctly in her own words, and I could not get her out of the plant. Elsie asked me once, about 2 years in, whether I ever thought about going and finding her. I said no. Elsie said, "Good." And then, after a length of silence that was pure Elsie Marchbank, she was a strange little thing. That one wouldn't take her shoes off, wouldn't stop coming either. And that is where I was on the 4th of April at 28 years old, 3 weeks past the point where the roof needed 12,000 pounds nobody had. 4 days into an argument with the council's leisure officer about a Tuesday class of 6 women standing on a stepladder in the hall replacing a roof light seal with tape because we had run out of the thing that was not tape. Kit came in from the foyer and stood at the bottom of the ladder and said, in her carrying voice, that there was a woman at the counter who wanted the keeper and would not say, "What about?" and that she had a folder, and that Kit did not like her. I said, "Does she look council?" Kit said, "No, she looks like the other thing." She was standing in the middle of the hall with her back to me, looking up at the roof. 4 years and 8 months. Her hair was shorter, the silver at her temple had spread, and she still had not colored it. She had a folder under her arm and a coat over it, and she was in an empty swimming pool hall on a Tuesday morning in April, absolutely and completely still. I came down the ladder. I did not hurry, and I did not say her name. Kit, who did not know anything, looked at my face and then at hers, and went and stood by the door of the foyer with her arms folded in a way she had copied off Elsie Marchbank without ever noticing. Ines turned round. I have thought a great deal about the first 4 seconds, and I have never once got them to sit still. Her face did something and then stopped doing it. That is genuinely the best I can manage. Something went across it, fast, complete, with no polite social version underneath it to fall back on. And then it was gone, and what was left was the face from the newspaper. She said, "Nessa." I said, "What do you want?" And she put her palm flat on the tile of the wall beside her and held it there, and I watched her do it, and something under my sternum went hot and furious in a way I had not been ready for at all. Then she took the folder out from under her coat and held it out and said, "I need you to read this before anybody else in this town does." Harrow Group had bought the freehold of the Cawdry Public Baths from the Borough Council on the 29th of March for an amount of money that would not buy a semi-detached house in the city where their office was. The council had been trying to get rid of it for 11 years. I knew that. Everybody knew that. What I had not known, because nobody had told me, because the sale of a building does not require anybody to tell the woman living in it, was that they had finally succeeded. There were 40 pages. I read the first 6 standing up in the middle of my own hall in April, with my hand not entirely steady, and then I sat down on the tiled step of the shallow end, which you are not supposed to do, and read the rest. Closure of the facility, phased over 90 days, decommissioning of plant, termination of all casual and volunteer arrangements, vacant possession of the residential unit above the plant room by the 11th of January. And on page 31, at the bottom of the recommendation, in black ink from a matte black pen, I had watched a woman uncap 100 times in my own kitchen. I, Harrow. I said, "You signed it." She said, "Yes." I said, "When?" She said, "The 29th. I said, 6 days ago." She said, "Yes." I said, and I am not proud of the next part because I said it in the flat and reasonable voice I use for people who have put a plaster in the pool, which is the voice I use when I am at my absolute worst. I said, "So you came all the way up here to hand deliver it, did you?" That was thoughtful. Did your mother suggest that, or was it your idea? She did not answer that. She stood in the middle of my hall with her arms at her sides and let me say it, and did not defend herself. And I understood. 4 hours later, lying on my back on the flat sofa staring at the ceiling, that she had let me say it because if she had defended herself, I would have believed her. And she had decided in advance that I was not allowed to believe her yet. But before that, before I understood any of it, she waited until I had finished, and then she said the second thing she had come to say. And it turned the whole 90 days inside out. She said, "They can't drain it." I said, "What?" She said, "I have 3 separate contractors telling me the same thing, and none of them will put a name to a method statement. The east tank sits on the 1903 raft. If you empty that pool in the wrong order, the whole east wall moves, and the tank room goes with it, and it takes the terrace on Bank Street with it, because those foundations are shared, and nobody has drawn them since before the war." I said, "That's right." She said, "I know it's right. I'm telling you, they know it's right too. And they have all quietly declined the job." And then she said the thing I have played back more times than anything else anybody has ever said to me. She said, "The only person alive who knows how to take that building down safely is the woman we are evicting from it. And I have come here to ask you to do it. And you should say no." I said, "You're joking." She said, "No." I said, "You want me to switch off my own building?" She said, "No, I want you to be the one who does it, because if it is not you, it will be somebody with a clipboard and a schedule and a bonus. And they will do it in the wrong order. And it will take Elsie Marchbank's roof off with it, because Elsie Marchbank lives at number 11 Bank Street and has done since 1974. I stood up, I said, "Get out," and she said, "All right," and she picked up her coat and she went as far as the foyer, and then she stopped and came back 3 steps and put her palm flat on the tile again and said the only unguarded thing she said in that entire conversation, which was, "940 a week in a town this size. You should be very proud of that." Then she left, and I sat down on the tiled step of the shallow end again for about 40 minutes. And then I got up and went and finished the roof light with tape. I said yes 11 days later, and I want to be honest about why. Because it was not for Elsie's roof. It was for the 90 days. If a contractor came in, the pool went cold in a fortnight. If I did it properly, in the order the building needed, load transferred slowly, tank down by inches, Bessie brought off gently over weeks instead of shut down in an afternoon. It took the full 90 and possibly more. And every single one of those days was a day that Tuesday 9 o'clock still ran. 6 women in their 70s. Elsie at the shallow end with her arms folded. That was the entire calculation. I made them come to the building for it. That was the first condition. And I made it deliberately because there is a version of this where I go to an office in a city 40 miles away and sit at a table in a jacket I do not own. And I was not going to be that. And I wanted them in my hall with the green light on their faces. They came on the 15th of April. Ines, a woman called Verity Sar, 36, head of development, who was extremely good at her job and who shook my hand with both of hers, and a solicitor who spoke twice. Rosalind did not come. I noticed that. I did not understand it yet. I had written my conditions out longhand on the back of a chemical order form, because that was the paper that was in the plant room. And I put it on the table. And Verity Sari read it and looked up and said, "Is this a joke?" And Ines said, "No," and did not look up at all. 1. I run the decommission, not consulted on it. Run it. Nobody touches a valve without me. 2. The pool stays open to the public until 14 days before the tank comes down. And the Tuesday 9 o'clock runs until the last day the water is in the building, whichever is later. 3. No press, no photographs, no hoardings up on that frontage until the last week. 4. Elsie Marchbank keeps her key. 5. Whoever from Harrow Group is signing this comes to the building, in person, every working day, and stands in the plant room while it happens. Verity Sari laughed at number 5. She was not being unkind about it. She genuinely thought it was a joke, and she said, "We can't have a director of acquisitions standing in a boiler room in a Victorian bathhouse 4 days a week for 3 months," and turned to Ines to be agreed with. And Ines said, "Yes, you can." There was a pause of a particular quality. Verity said, "Ines." And Ines said, "All 5. Draw it up." And then she put her palm flat on the table, not the wall, the table, and I do not think she knew she had done it, and said, and put number 4 in as a deed, not a letter, a deed. I have wondered since whether I made number 5 out of spite. I have decided that I did. At least half. I wanted her in the plant room. I wanted her to have to stand next to the mug she left on the shelf above the pump and not be able to say anything about it. What I got instead was 94 days. The decommission of a building like Cawdry is not one job. It is about 40, and most of them are boring. And the boring ones are the ones that kill you if you get them wrong. Air out of the primary. Chemical dose down by stages so the water does not go over and turn on the tile. Load off the raft slowly enough that the 1903 mortar has time to think about it. Every one of those has a sequence, and every sequence has to be written down and signed by somebody who understands it. And it turned out that the somebody was me, and the person doing the writing down was her. So from the 22nd of April, 4 days a week, Ines Harrow stood in my plant room in a coat that was not really black with a clipboard she never once put down. And I told her what we were doing and why, and she wrote it in a hand I could read from 4 feet away upside down, and neither of us said one single word that was not about the building. The first 3 weeks I did not speak to her except in imperatives. Open that. Not that one. Wait. 20 minutes. Then tell me what the gauge says. She did all of it, immediately, without comment. And she was better at it than any assistant I have ever had. And it made me angrier, which I understand now was completely unreasonable, and which at the time felt like the most rational position I had ever held. Kit worked her out on day 4. Kit came and found me in the chemical store and said, "That's her, isn't it? The one from before." And I said, "Yes." And Kit said, "Right." And then, after a moment in a completely different voice, And she's here every day because you told her to be, and she's actually doing it. I said she's doing it because it's in the contract. Kit said Nessa, she's the one who wrote the contract. The Tuesday 9 o'clock class carried on. That was the point of all of it, and it is worth telling you what it actually was. Because from the outside, it is 6 old women in a pool, and from the inside, it was the entire town. Doreen Vance, 76, who had a stroke in 2019 and got back into that water 11 weeks later because Elsie went round to her house and stood in her kitchen with her arms folded. June Akhtar, 73, who could not swim at all until she was 68. Pat and Marjorie, who were 71 and 80 and had been coming since 1961 and did not swim so much as have a conversation slowly in the shallow end, moving. Elsie in the water with them by then rather than at the side, because at 74 you may as well. They knew by the second week of May exactly who the woman standing at the back of the viewing gallery in a dark green coat was. Cawdry is 9,000 people. Of course they knew. They were unbelievably kind to her. It was the cruelest thing they could have done, and I do not think a single one of them intended it that way. Doreen Vance took her a cup of tea on the third Tuesday. Just went up the gallery stairs with it at 76, one at a time, and handed it over and said something I did not hear, and came back down. I asked her afterwards what she had said. Doreen said, I told her she's got her grandmother's chin. By the end of May, the pool was down 4 degrees, and I had stopped being able to sustain it. That is the honest version. You cannot stand 2 feet from somebody for 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, in a hot, loud room, doing careful work that requires you to hand each other tools and maintain a temperature. The body will not do it. Around the 18th of May, I noticed that I had started to say things to her that were not imperatives, and around the 24th, I noticed that she had started to answer. The first real conversation we had was about a valve. There is a gate valve on the secondary return that has been out of true since 1944, when a bomb came down 2 streets away and moved everything in that basement about ½ an inch. And if you close it the way it wants to be closed, it will not seal. You have to close it, open it a quarter, and close it again. And my grandmother taught me that with her hand over mine when I was 9. Ines went to close it, and I said no. And she said quarterback, and again, I know and did it, and it sealed. And then she stood there with her hand still on it and said, I have done that in 3 other buildings, not on purpose. It's just what my hand does now. And I said before I had decided to, she taught me that with her hand over mine. And Ines said, I know, I watched her do it. I said when she said the second winter, you were both down here and neither of you knew I'd come down. The thing about the restraint arc, and it was one, and it lasted from the end of May until the 29th of July, is that nothing happened in it. I want that to be clear because I have told this story out loud twice, and both times somebody has assumed that a room that warm produces something immediately, and it did not. And the not producing was the whole architecture of it. What we had instead was a distance of about 4 feet, maintained by both of us, with an attention that I now think was the most exhausting thing either of us has ever done. She never once touched me. In 94 days. She handed me things, and she was careful about the handover. She would put a spanner on the ledge rather than into my hand. I noticed that on the 11th of June, And after that, I could not stop noticing it, and I began, without deciding to test it, to reach for the same shelf, to stand slightly closer to the gauge than I needed to. And every single time she moved the 4 feet back, calmly, without any indication that she had noticed she was doing it, and I would go home furious and get up the next morning and do it again. That is not a romantic thing to admit. I am admitting it anyway. I cataloged her. I did it the way you do it when you are 28 and pretending you are only working. Her hair came loose at the nape by 4 in the afternoon. Every day, without fail, regardless of what she had done to it in the morning. She turned the signet inward with her thumb when she was thinking, 3 or 4 times a minute, and had no idea. She drank tea out of the chipped enamel mug from the shelf above the pump from the second week, without ever once mentioning that it was the mug, and washed it and put it back in exactly the same place. And if I moved it, she moved it back. She never took her shoes off. She smelled of cold cedar and rain on iron. And in a hot plant room in June, that is not a thing you can be neutral about. And there were days I went and stood in the chemical store for 2 minutes for no reason at all. And she was better with the 6 women in that Tuesday class than she was with anyone else on earth, and did not appear to know it. She learned their names in a fortnight. She learned that June Akhtar had come to Cawdry from Karachi in 1974 and had been frightened of water for 50 years, and then was not. She fetched a chair down from the gallery for Marjorie without being asked, and then did it every week. And then it was Marjorie's chair. Elsie watched all of this from the shallow end, with her arms folded, and said absolutely nothing for 6 weeks. Then, on the 9th of July, drying her hair in the corridor, she said, "She's not here for the building, love." I said she's here because the contract says she has to be. Elsie said, "She wrote the contract." I said, "That's what Kit said." Elsie said, "Well, Kit's not stupid either." The other thing that happened in those weeks, and it is the thing that eventually broke the whole story open, is that I started, professionally, to disagree with a piece of paper. Buried in the 40-page pack Ines handed me in April, at Appendix C, there was a structural report. It was the thing that made the closure look inevitable to the council. An independent survey from the previous autumn, concluding that the east tank was at end of life, that thermal movement across the raft had gone past a tolerable limit, and that the building could not be safely returned to public use without a sum of money 3 times what it would cost to knock it down. I read it in April, and it made me want to be sick. I read it again in June, properly, at a table with a pencil, because by then I had my hands on the actual tank 4 days a week, and something about it was wrong. Everything in that report ran off one number, a temperature differential across the raft, measured in November, at a single point. And I knew that point. I had been walking past that point twice a day for 6 years. It was 11 inches from the calorifier return. You could not have chosen a worse place to measure the thermal behavior of that raft if you had set out to. Everything in that basement is hot near that pipe. The whole east tank room is a different building 3 feet either side of it. The number in that report was real. It just was not a measurement of the building. It was a measurement of a pipe. I told nobody for 4 weeks. I want to be honest about why. partly because I wanted to be sure. I put my own loggers down, 8 of them at 8 points, and ran them from the 9th of June to the 12th of July. And I have those graphs, and they are the single most useful thing I have ever done with my hands. But mostly because for 4 weeks I could not work out what would happen to me if I said it out loud in a building owned by the woman I was in the middle of not touching. Ines Harrow came to Cawdry on the 29th of July. She came at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, which I have never once believed was an accident, because at 11 on a Tuesday, there are 6 women in their 70s getting changed and talking at a volume you can hear from the foyer. She had not been in that building in 4 years. She stood in the middle of my hall in a pale coat, with the green light coming down off the roof onto her. And she was perfectly pleasant to me for 6 minutes, and she asked after the boiler by name. And then she asked me to come and sit down, and she opened a folder of her own. She said quietly, without any heat at all, in the voice you have to lean towards, that she wanted to be straightforward with me because she felt I had earned that. She said that she had been made aware that the decommission had fallen behind schedule. She said that she was aware of the arrangement about the Tuesday class and that she personally thought it did me a great deal of credit. And then she said, "I understand you and my daughter have a history." I said, "That was 4 years ago." She said, 4 years and 8 months. And then she said, without any change in her tone at all, "I want to tell you what I told her at the time, because I do not think she will ever tell you herself. And I have decided that on balance you should have it." Here is what she told me in the hall of my own building on the 29th of July at 11 o'clock in the morning, while 6 women in their 70s got changed 40 feet away. In November, 4 years and 8 months ago, Ines Harrow went to her mother and asked her to buy the Cawdry Public Baths. Not for the group, for her. She had costed it. The roof, the tank, the raft, the roof lights, the whole thing. And she had a number, and the number was 1.1 million pounds, and she did not have it and never would in any time scale that mattered, because everything she had was in a company her mother controlled. Ines Harrow said no, and then Ines Harrow said something else, which was, "I will lend it to you against your salary over 5 years on one condition." The condition was a clause, 5 years from the date of the advance. No interest, financial or personal, in the borough of Cawdry. No property, no directorship, no residence, and no relationship with any person resident in it. Breach and the loan falls in immediately, in full, and the security is the building. The security was the building. If Ines came back, if she wrote, if she called, if she was seen on Bank Street, her mother took the baths and did what her mother does with buildings. I said, "That isn't legal," Ines Harrow said. "It is a private arrangement between family members, and it has never needed to be." I said, "Why are you telling me this?" And she said, and this is the part I have gone over most, because I have never been able to decide how much of it she meant. She said, "Because she has 3 months left to run, Nessa, and she is going to do something stupid." And I would rather you were the one to stop her, since it will cost you less than it cost me. Then she put a check on the table. I want to describe this accurately because it is the single most insulting thing that has ever happened to me, and it was done with total courtesy. She did not slide it. She did not push it. She put it down squarely, face up, so I could read it. And then she took her hand off it and left it there and folded her hands in her lap and waited. The way you wait for somebody to pick up a pen at a counter. 60,000 pounds, made out to me, dated that day. She said, "That is a flat outright in this town or any other. That is 4 years of not getting up at 5:30. Nobody will ever ask you where it came from, and I will never mention it again." I have thought a great deal about what I should have said. What I did say was, "Get that off my grandmother's table." It was not my grandmother's table. It was a folding table from the foyer. She did not correct me. She picked up the check and put it back in the folder and stood and said, "Thank you for your time." And then she said one more thing on her way out, over her shoulder, without turning around, in exactly the same warm voice she had used about the boiler. She said, "She has never once been able to hold on to anything wet." I did not tell Ines any of it. I want that on the record because it goes some way to explaining the next 12 hours. I stood in a plant room from 2 until 6:30 that afternoon with a woman whose mother had just tried to buy me out of her, and I said nothing because I did not know what any of it was yet. Whether it was a threat or a kindness, or the two of them working the same rope from opposite ends. And because there was a much simpler thing underneath, which was that if I said it out loud, I would have to find out whether it was true. She knew something was wrong. Of course she did. She asked me twice, in the flattest possible way, "All right?" And I said fine, and the second time she looked at me for about 2 seconds too long and then went back to the clipboard. At 6:30, she washed the mug and put it back on the shelf and picked up her coat. And at the door of the plant room, with her back to me, she said, "My mother was here this morning." I said, "Yes." She said, "Right." And then she stood there for a second and said, "Whatever she offered you, take it." I said, "What?" She said, "Take it. She'll pay it. She's never once not paid." And I said, "And that's your advice, is it?" And she turned round and said the first thing she had said in 94 days with any heat behind it at all, which was, "You are living above a boiler in a building I am switching off in 11 weeks. And you have 4,000 pounds in the world, and you are going to be homeless in January. And yes, that is my advice, take the money." And I said, "How do you know how much money I have?" And that is where it came apart, because she did not have an answer, and she stood in the doorway of the plant room and could not produce one. And I watched a woman who has never in her life been at a loss for an answer, be at a loss for an answer. Then she put her palm flat on the wall by the door, and she said, "Because I have read the accounts of this building every quarter for 4 years and 8 months, and your drawings are in them." We went up to the flat. I want to be exact about how that happened, because it was not a decision. It was that neither of us could have that conversation standing in a doorway. And my kitchen was up 11 stairs, and we went up them. She stood in the kitchen with her back to the window and told me all of it. And she told it badly, in the wrong order, which is how I knew it was true, because I had never once heard her tell anything in the wrong order. The 1.1 million, the clause, the 5 years. The fact that she had signed it in a solicitor's office in November on a Thursday afternoon and gone straight from there to a train, and that she had 11 days of it left to arrange before she left, and that she had used them to bring a boiler up from cold 4 times so she would know she could do it in case at some point somebody had to, and the part I had not known, which was the part that did it. She had never intended to be away 5 years. She had intended to be away 2. The loan was against her salary, and her salary was enormous. And she had a schedule, and the schedule said 26 months. In month 19, her mother restructured the company, moved Ines's package into shares that could not be sold for a fixed period, and put the loan on the long term. And there was nothing in the paper anywhere that said she had done it on purpose. Ines said, "I had a date. I had it on a piece of paper in my wallet for 19 months. And then it moved, and I could not tell you it had moved, because telling you meant telling you there had been a date. And if you had known there was a date, you would have waited." I said, "I did wait." She said, I know you did. Elsie told me. I said, "Elsie," and she said, "Elsie Marchbank has written to me every Christmas for 4 years, 4 letters. She never once mentioned you until the last one." I said, "What did the last one say?" And Ines said, "It said, the roof's going and the girl's on her own, and I'm too old for this. And then it said she's still here." Here is the part I'm allowed to tell you. She was standing with her back to the window, and I was standing by the door of my own kitchen. And there was about 4 feet between us, which by then was a measurement I could have made in the dark. And I said, "Come here." And she said, "If I come over there, I am going to breach a clause that takes this building off you." And I said, "Ines, come here." She crossed the kitchen, and she put her hand at my jaw and her thumb at my cheekbone. And she stopped with about an inch left and waited, because she has never in her life taken anything that was not given to her twice. I said her name. She kissed me. And 94 days of 4 feet went out of that room like water out of a bath. And this is where I have to stop, because what happened next was never meant for YouTube. If you want the uncut version, it's waiting on my Patreon. The link is in the description. She was gone before 6 the next morning, not the way she went the first time. She left a note on the kitchen table under the brass check, and the note said, 11 weeks. I will fix it. Don't sign anything. And she was on the 740 from Cawdry with the folder under her arm. I found out from Verity Sorry at 2 in the afternoon that Ines Harrow had been taken off the Cawdry project. Rosalind Harrow does not shout, and she does not threaten, and she does not, in my experience, ever explain herself twice. What she does is administrative. By Friday of that week, the director of acquisitions had been moved to a portfolio in the South. The Cawdry decommission had been handed to Verity Sorry with a revised program, and the phased 90 days had become 40. 40 days took the water out before Christmas. I rang the office in the city 11 times over the following fortnight. She was in a meeting. She was traveling. She would be told I had called. On the 9th call, the woman on the other end, who was kind, and who I do not blame for 1 second, said, "I'm very sorry, I'm not able to put anything through to her." Not, "She isn't answering." Not able to. I found out I was pregnant on the 22nd of August. I sat on the floor of the bathroom in the flat above the plant room with my back against the door and the pipes ticking under me, and I did the arithmetic 4 times. And then I stopped doing it because it was not complicated arithmetic and I knew exactly which night it had been. And then I did the other arithmetic, which was the clause. If she came back, the loan fell in full, and the security was the building. If she came back for me, if she came back because I told her, then Ines Harrow took the Cawdry Public Baths on a default, and the 6 women in the Tuesday class swam in whatever the borough had left, which was nothing, and Elsie Marchbank's roof came off along with the tank, and every single one of the things Ines had signed her whole life away to prevent happened anyway, and it happened because of me. And there were 3 months left. 3 months. So I did not tell her. I want to defend that, and I am not going to. Elsie told me I was wrong. Kit told me I was wrong in language I will not repeat. Kit was 22 and had never in her life had to weigh a person against a building and told me so, and she was completely right. And I told her that she did not understand, and she said, "No, you're right, I don't. Because if it was me, I'd have got on the train." The truth is that underneath the arithmetic, there was something much smaller and much less noble, which was that a woman had already left me once without an explanation, and I could not, physically could not, the way you cannot make yourself put your hand on a hot pipe, take the risk of telling her something enormous and getting nothing back. So I put it in a drawer, and I ran a building, and I got very good at wearing my grandmother's coats. The 40 days ran out on the 19th of December. The last public swim at the Cawdry Public Baths was a Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, 6 women in their 70s and Elsie Marchbank in the water with her arms folded. At 74, they did widths. That was Elsie's decision, and she did not put it to a vote. Doreen Vance, who had a stroke in 2019, did 4. June Akhtar, who was frightened of water for 50 years, did 6. Pat and Marjorie had a conversation, slowly in the shallow end, moving. I stood at the rail with my hand in the water, and I could not read it because I was crying. And it turns out that is the one thing that stops it working. And then Elsie got out and got dressed and came and stood next to me and said, "Right, show me how to turn her off." So I took a 74-year-old woman down into the plant room and let her close the valve because her hands had been in that building longer than mine, and she did it with her mouth in a completely straight line, and then she said, "Quarter back," and again, and I said, "I know, Elsie," and she said, "I know you know, love, I'm saying it for me." I was 36 weeks pregnant on Christmas Eve. I was not showing much, and I was wearing a coat of my grandmother's that would have fitted a horse. And I told the council's leisure officer that I had put on weight, and she believed me because people believe anything that saves them a conversation. The eviction was set for the 11th of January. Vacant possession of the residential unit above the plant room. It was in the pack in April. It had always been in the pack. I had until the 11th to find somewhere, and I did not find somewhere, because in this town, at that notice with no deposit, there is nowhere, and because I spent the last fortnight of December doing something else instead. I finished the report, 8 loggers, 8 points, 33 days of data from the previous summer, plotted against the single November measurement that had closed the building, plus the drawings, plus the 1944 half-inch, plus a 2-page methodology written in language a counselor could read at 11 at night. And Appendix C, the actual survey, with one line highlighted, which was the line giving the measurement location, and my note underneath it, which was 6 words long. This is 11 inches from the calorifier, the whole building. 11 years of managed decline. A sale at a price that would not buy a semi-detached house, and one number taken in the wrong place by somebody who did not know the difference, and never checked by anybody who did. I sent it to the borough on the 6th of January. I sent a copy to Elsie. I did not send one to Harrow Group, because Harrow Group had made it extremely clear that they were not able to put anything through. The 11th of January was a Saturday. They came at 7 in the morning, which is legal, and which is also 7 in the morning. 2 women in high visibility coats, perfectly decent about it, doing a job neither of them wanted at that hour in that weather. And one of them said sorry to me twice, and meant it. I had a carrier bag and a rucksack and my grandmother's coat and Kit's spare coat over the top of it because mine would not fasten. The tin with the receipts, the bootlace with the brass check on it round my neck inside the collar, the mug from the shelf above the pump, which I took at the last second, out of the plant room, in front of a woman with a drill. They put the steel plate over the door at 4 minutes past 7. It was snowing the way it does here, slow and enormous and completely uninterested in any of it. And at 8 minutes past 7, standing on the pavement with a carrier bag, I had the first one. I had had them for 2 days and had decided, in the way you decide things when you have nowhere to go, that they were not that. This one was that. I put my hand on the sealed door, and I did the arithmetic on how far Elsie's house was. 400 yards, Bank Street, up the hill in that snow. And I had got as far as deciding to do it in 3 stages, when a car came up the road too fast and stopped badly. She got out of it without a coat on. She had been driving since 4:30 in the morning. She walked straight past me, and I understood later that she had not seen me at all, that she had come round the front of that car and gone directly at the building the way you go at a thing you have been driving 3 hours towards. And she put her palm flat on the steel plate over the door of the Cawdry Public Baths and held it there and said to nobody, "It's still warm." Then she turned round. Here is what she saw. A woman she had last touched in July, in a coat that would have fitted a horse, at 39 weeks and 4 days, holding a carrier bag in the snow, with a hand on the small of her own back. I watched it arrive. It arrived in 3 parts, and the 3rd part took her legs for a second. She actually put a hand on the bonnet of the car. She said, "Nessa." And I said, "Because there is no good way, and because I had been rehearsing 7 different ways since August, and every one of them left me, I said, I need you to not ask me anything for about 10 minutes. She did not ask me anything for about 10 minutes. That is the single best thing anybody has ever done for me. She got the boot open and got the bag in it. She got the door of the building open, which she could do because she had the key, because Harrow Group owned it, and she took the plate off with a bar out of the boot in under 90 seconds, and I have never seen anybody take anything apart that fast. The heating had been off since the 19th of December. But a building like that is 900 tons of brick and stone and water-warmed mortar, and it had been holding the whole town's heat for 121 years, and it lets it go over weeks, not days. She was right. It was still warm. We got as far as the plant room. That was the plan, and it was the right plan. It is the warmest room in the building by 4 degrees even cold, because of the mass of Bessie in the middle of it. And it is the only room with a floor you can lie on. And it was 30 feet from a door instead of 11 stairs. I said phone. She said done it. 20 minutes. The road up from the valley's shut. They're coming the long way. I said right. And then I had one that took the room away for a while. And when it came back, she had got her coat off the seat of the car and folded it under my head and had her hand in mine and was saying numbers at me in a completely flat voice, which was exactly right. Because there is nothing on this earth I have ever wanted less in a crisis than somebody being emotional at me. The coat still smelled of cold cedar and rain on iron. 4 years and 8 months, and I had never once been able to describe it to anybody, and had never once had to. 20 minutes became 55. The valley road was shut, and the long way round is 19 miles. At some point, I said, "You're gonna have to." And she said, "I know." And I said, "Have you ever?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Right, well." And she said, in exactly the voice she used to use about a gauge, "Tell me what to do, and I will do it." So I did. And she did. My daughter was born on the floor of the plant room of the Cawdry Public Baths at 11 minutes to 9 on the morning of the 11th of January, on a coat that is not really black, 4 feet from a boiler with Bessie cast into the plate on her front, in a building that had been sealed shut for 1 hour and 47 minutes. She was small and extremely annoyed about all of it. And Ines Harrow, who had never done anything of the kind in her life, and who did every single thing I said in the order I said it, picked her up off the coat and got her inside her own jumper held against her, because that is what I told her to do. And there was nothing else warm in the room. And then she stopped. I want to describe this properly because it is the center of the whole thing, and I only get one go at it. She had been moving without a pause for nearly an hour. Fast, exact, no wasted motion. The most competent person in any room she has ever been in. And she got that baby against her. And she stopped completely, the way a machine stops when the power goes. And she made a sound I had never heard her make. And she went down onto her knees on the tile. She was not looking at her face. She had her face turned in against the top of that baby's head, and she was not looking at anything. She said, "Whose is she?" And then, before I could answer, in a voice that had nothing left in it, "No, no, I know." Here is the thing about my grandmother's sentence, and about the other way she meant it. You cannot lie to a hot bath. That is the first way. But the second way is the one she never said out loud. And the second way is this: heat carries. That is all scent is. That is all it has ever been. Cold, a thing keeps itself. Warm, it gives itself away. And there is nothing in this world warmer than something that has just been born. And there is no lie in it anywhere, because it has not had time to learn one. An alpha does not work out whose a newborn is. She is told by a part of herself that predates every clever thing she has ever done at a range of about 4 inches in a hot room, and there is no appeal against it, and there is no politeness in it. And Ines Harrow, who had spent 4 years and 8 months keeping every single thing she felt on the inside of her own ribs, went down on her knees on a tiled floor in front of me and was, for about 90 seconds, completely undone. Warm water gives everyone away. She had been in that building since she was 9, and it got her in the end. The ambulance came at 20 to 10. They were very good. They were also, both of them, from Cawdry, and one of them had swum in that pool as a child. And I watched a paramedic take in the room, the boiler, the coat, the woman on her knees who would not put the baby down and could not be made to, and decide professionally to say nothing at all about any of it, which I appreciated. At the door, Ines put her palm flat on the tile of the corridor wall. She said, "Is she mine?" I said, "You know she is." She said, "Say it anyway." I said, "She's yours." And she said, and it is the only time in nearly 8 years I have ever heard her voice do anything at all in public. She said, "Right." The disposal hearing was on the 29th of January in the council chamber at Cawdry Town Hall, which holds 140 people sitting down and had about 300 in it. I need to explain what that hearing was because on paper it was nothing. A formality to note the completed sale, receive the decommissioning report, and approve the change of use application for the site. 14 minutes of business, the kind of thing 4 people normally attend. Except that on the 6th of January, a woman living above a boiler had sent the borough 33 days of temperature data and a 6-word note, and it had gone round the town the way things go round a town of 9,000 people. And by the 29th, there were 300 of them in that chamber, and about 150 more outside it in the snow. Elsie Marchbank was in the 2nd row with a biscuit tin on her knees. I was 18 days postpartum, and I should not have been there. And Elsie had told me so, and Kit had told me so, and I went and Kit drove me, and Kit held my daughter at the back of the chamber for the entire proceedings, with an expression that dared any person in that room to comment. Rosalind Harrow sat at the front on the applicant's side, with Verity Sauret on her right, and on her left, in a coat that is not really black, at 4 in the afternoon with her hair coming loose at the nape, sat Ines. The chair took the sale first and noted it, then the decommissioning report and noted it. Then she came to the change of use, and she said before we proceed, the committee has received a technical submission from a member of the public, which officers have had 4 days to consider, and I am going to take the officer's response. And the officer stood up and said that the submission raised a material issue, which the authority had not previously been aware of. That the survey underpinning the closure recommendation appeared to contain a methodological error of a kind that could not be corrected without a fresh survey, and that on that basis, officers were no longer able to advise the committee that the building was at end of life. There was a noise in that room I have never heard before or since. Rosalind Harrow stood up. Of course she did. She was, as always, entirely courteous. She said that Harrow Group had bought in good faith on the strength of a survey commissioned by the council itself. She said that the group had no wish to be obstructive, but that the freehold was the freehold, and that a technical dispute about a temperature reading did not alter the fact that the building belonged to Harrow Group and had, in any event, been lawfully vacated. And then she said, gently, that she understood there was a great deal of local feeling, and that feeling was not a survey. And she sat down, and her daughter stood up. Ines Harrow put her palm flat on the table in front of her. 300 people watched a woman put her hand on a table and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. And about 4 of us in that room did. And one of them was 74 years old with a biscuit tin on her knees. She said, "I'm the signatory. I signed the recommendation on the 29th of March. I'd like to withdraw it." The chair said, "I'm not sure you can." And Ines said, "Then I'd like it on the record that I've tried, and I'd like to say why, and it will take 4 minutes." She said it flat, without notes, in the order it happened, which is the only time I have ever heard her tell anything in the right order. That she was born in this town, that she learned to swim in that building at 9, badly, in a class she hated, and that she kept her shoes on for a reason that was nobody's business, and that Elsie Marchbank did not let her leave. That 4 years and 8 months ago, she had gone to her mother and asked her to buy the Cawdry Public Baths for £1.1 million, and had been offered a loan instead, and had signed for it, and that the security on that loan was the building itself, and that the conditions attached to it were personal, and that she had accepted them, and that she was not going to describe them in a public hearing because it was not the committee's business, that she had spent 4 years working to a date, and the date had moved and she had let it, and that she had signed the closure recommendation in March knowing all of it, and had come to Cawdry the next week and put it in the hands of the only person who could stop it. Because there was one thing in the whole arrangement her mother had never thought to write down. The chair said, "Which was?" And Ines said, "My mother bought a building with a survey in the file. Nobody in this room checked the survey. I didn't check it either. I read it 11 times, and it never once occurred to me to ask where the sensor was, because I am not a plant engineer." She said, "The keeper of that building is. And the keeper of that building has been telling this authority for 6 years that the East Tank Room is a different building 3 feet either side of the calorifier return. And every single time she has been told she is not qualified to hold an opinion about it." And then she looked up, past the chair, at the back of the room, and she said, "She is qualified. She's the only person in this borough who is. And she has just spent 33 days proving it. With 8 loggers she paid for herself out of a wage this council has frozen for 9 years." Rosalind Harrow said quietly from her seat, "Ines." And Ines Harrow said, without turning round, "I know exactly what this costs. I did the arithmetic in the car." Then Elsie Marchbank stood up in the second row with a biscuit tin, 74 years old, in her good coat, and she said, "I'd like to hand something in." The chair said, "Madam, this isn't..." And Elsie said, "It's the license book. 1903. It's got the keeper's tenancy in it, and it's got the class of it. and I've had it in my sideboard since your lot put it in a skip in 1997, and I'd like it minuted that I've handed it over of my own accord and I want it back. The tenancy of the keeper's flat above the plant room at the Cawdry Public Baths was granted in 1903, and it was granted as a protected tied tenancy for the keeper and her successors in office, and it was recorded as such in ink in a book that was in a skip in 1997 and in a biscuit tin from then until the 29th of January. In 2021, the borough's asset register, after a reorganization, after a software migration, after a series of decisions nobody has ever been able to attach a name to, recorded it as a service occupancy. A service occupancy ends when the service ends. A protected tied tenancy does not, which means that on the 11th of January, at 4 minutes past 7 in the morning, in the snow, 2 women in high visibility coats had put a steel plate over the door of a building I was legally entitled to be living in. I do not know whether Rosalind Harrow knew. I have decided I am never going to know, and that deciding it was the only way to be able to sit in a room with her at Christmas, which I now have to do. What I know is that she did not look surprised, and then the officer said that in the circumstances, he would advise the committee to defer. And the chair said she was minded to agree, and somebody at the back started clapping, and about 200 people joined in, and it took some time. And in the middle of it, with 300 people making that noise in a council chamber in a town of 9,000, Ines Harrow walked down the side of the room to the back where Kiddo Koro was standing holding an 18-day-old baby, and she took her daughter and she came to me. She put her palm flat on the wall beside my head, and she said, so I could hear it, and so could the 4 rows nearest us, and so, as it turned out, could the local paper. I'm not signing it. I'm not signing anything to do with this building ever again. My mother can call the loan in on Monday, and she will. And it takes the house and the shares, and it does not take this, because this is not hers and it never was. She said, this is Nessa Rooke. She is the keeper of this building, and I have loved her since I was 29, and I left because I thought I was buying her a roof. And this is our daughter. And she was born on the floor of that plant room 3 weeks ago, with nobody in the room but the 2 of us. And then she said, in front of 300 people, in the voice she uses about a gauge, I'd like to be claimed properly, please, if you'll have me. I said, come here. And she said, I am here. She had it done at the joint of my neck and shoulder in the corridor outside the chamber, with about 40 people pretending very hard to be looking at a notice board, and Elsie Marchbank standing in front of us with her arms folded like a woman who has spent 55 years clearing a lane. The mark is small and slightly crooked, and I would not have it any other way. Kit says it looks like a comma. Kit is not wrong. Rosalind Harrow called the loan in on the Monday. She took the flat in the city and the shares and every last thing her daughter had. And it took 4 months. And she never once raised her voice about any of it. She came to the christening in June. I do not know what to tell you about that. Elsie thinks she is a hard woman who did one enormous wrong thing and has decided at 64 to spend the rest of her life not being able to fix it. Kit thinks she came to look at the building. My daughter, who is 3 now, calls her Rose and is the only person on this earth who can make her laugh. And I have watched that happen from a doorway more than once and had to go and stand in the chemical store for 2 minutes. She has never apologized to me, and I have never asked her to. She sent a check again in the 2nd year for the roof, made out to the trust and not to me, and the trust took it because the trust is not proud, and the roof was going. The Cawdry Public Baths reopened on the 14th of September, 20 months after the 11th of January, as a community benefit society with 411 local members. A fresh survey with sensors in 11 correct places, and a repaired 1903 raft that has moved, in the 2 years since, by less than the width of a fingernail. Harrow Group sold the freehold to the society for £1. That was Verity Sare's idea, and Verity Sare pushed it through her own board in 11 days, and I will be grateful to that woman for the rest of my life. Elsie Marchbank taught the first class back. 9 o'clock Tuesday. There were 19 of them in the water by then. Word had got round. Doreen Vance did 6 widths. June Akhtar, who was frightened of water for 50 years, went in the deep end for the first time at 75 and had to be talked out again. Kit Okoro runs the whole building now. I am the plant. I am on a wage from the society that is nearly a real wage, and I still get up at 5:30. And Ines does the accounts and the funding applications and every single thing involving a form, and works from the room above the foyer and takes her shoes off in that building now, every day, at the door. Our daughter is called Bess. She is named after 900 tons of cast iron in the basement with her name on a plate, and everybody in Cawdry thinks that is very funny except her, because she is 3 and considers Bessie to be a member of the family, and is not wrong. She can swim. Obviously, she can swim. Elsie had her in that water at 11 months and stood in the shallow end with her arms folded and would not let anybody leave. Last Tuesday, I came down into the plant room at 6:10 in the morning to bring the system up, and they were both already down there. Ines was standing in front of the header tank with Bess on her hip, in a jumper, with her hair still down, and she had the child's hand flat against the emerald tile of the wall, and was holding it there. She did not know I was on the stairs, and I heard my daughter, who is 3, say, "Is it warm?" And I heard her mother say, "You tell me." And Bess, with her whole palm on a 123-year-old wall, in a building her great-great-grandmother opened at 5:30 every morning for 26 years, said, "It's still warm."